Okay, thanks, Senator. Deputy Higgins.
Yes. Governor, to a general question first. Some people would feel that in your report, and indeed in other reports, in trying to get to this mystery of why there wasn't an intervention to stop the property bubble being blown up, there's too much tiptoeing through the tulips, and that you can get to a very fundamental reason. Is it the case that the property bubble was blown to extremes by the scramble for super profits by banks, developers, bondholders, that is what the capitalist financial markets are all about? That ideology is shared by government, by the majority of the legislature in this state, by much of the media, and also that the regulatory authorities, most of whom came through that system, share that, and that the prevailing spirit is don't separate the lion from its prey. That's what they do. Let them at it.
Yeah, that's right. That's the way it is.
You agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of dramatic way of doing it, and at least you haven't given me like one word that I'm to get hung up on, like intrusive, which. But in broad terms, it's your way of putting, I think, a situation.
Yeah, let's move on then. In page 109, we're making excellent progress so far, I have to say. In page 109, Governor, you say, to paraphrase, the financial regulator and the central bank were mandated by legislation to pursue two goals: financial stability on the one hand, and then on the other, promotion of the financial sector.
Yeah.
And then you say, which may well have been in conflict.
Yeah.
Right? While the stability goal was given explicit priority, the potential conflict between the two goals complicated choices, you said. Now, let's be concrete. The promotion of the financial sector must mean inviting banks in and encouraging existing banks to flourish, and the bank's raison d'etre is the maximisation of profit, and the property bubble was the site for making the quickest profits. Therefore, blowing the bubble bigger was in their interest. Is there an irreconcilable conflict between promoting this on the one hand, which the financial regulator was tasked to do, and on the other hand, strong regulation that would restrict such profiteering?
As we saw in the end, it was very bad for the shareholders of Anglo-Irish Bank and so forth. Some people benefited from it, don't dispute that, but it was very bad for them in the end. Unrestrained use of depositors' funds for pumping up the property market is not a good thing and is not part of the well-functioning capitalist society. That's why they are regulated. That's why they are supposed to be regulated. Was there a conflict? Yes, there is a conflict, and that was supposed to have been resolved in favour of stability. That's what the legislation said, that you can only attend to promotion of the financial sector, or whatever it's called, as long as you've got the prudential under control, the financial stability under control. But that's a difficult thing to match, and that's why I pressed very hard to make sure that promotion of the financial service sector was taken out of the legislation.
Okay, right. Now, you say, again in page 109, the financial regulator was in a difficult position as the possible adverse effects of discouraging inward investment in the Irish financial services sector were more immediate and real than the perceived distant concerns about financial stability. So you are saying there, are you, that proper effective regulation would discourage investment in the IFSC?
It would limit it to what would be regarded as prudent. So, for example, Deputy, when some bankers come in to me and say, we're thinking of coming into the IFSC, or we have a unit in the IFSC, and we just thought we'd come, I'm the world headquarters, I just want to come and see, what's the regulatory situation, or we're happy or unhappy with the regulatory situation. I say, what we provide here in the central bank is a service to the customers of the financial service industry to have a proper regulation. You will be regulated to the top international standards. That's what you can expect. And most of the credible firms that say that, they say that's exactly what we want. It's only the people who are sailing close to the wind that are discouraged by that.
Yeah, but then, Professor, to return to your non-intrusive regulatory environment conducive to promoting the IFSC as considered important by the government, the Department of the Taoiseach took a lead role, and you referred to the Clearinghouse Group. And for people who don't know, that's a body that was set up in 1987, and it provides incredible access by all the leading financial institutions, big banks, etc., to the highest political offices in this land, right?
Well, I suppose, in fairness, I don't think there are political people at that clearinghouse group. I think it's all officials.
Yes, but the officials who are the key advisors to the Taoiseach, especially the Minister for Finance. Now, didn't participation in that type of industry-heavy grouping, wasn't that a restraining factor on the regulator, who was also part of that structure?
Well, of course, it's part and parcel of having been charged with the development of the Financial Services Centre. But nowadays, I would want to have somebody there watching what's going on, but not contributing to any weakening of regulation. I wouldn't like to have those meetings happening without sufficient sight of what was being talked about.
Okay. Now, also, Governor, you say in page 109, quote, the Chair and Chief Executive Officer of the Financial Regulator participated in several roadshows to promote the Irish Financial Services Centre. And the financial regulator approach was characterised as being user-friendly in presentations aimed at expanding the export financial services sector.
Yeah.
Now,
that's user-friendly. That's the sort of term that I was trying to get at. When, not so much non-intrusive as user-friendly, but anyway.
But in presenting roadshows to the big bankers, the bondholders, those who were wanting to make a killing in the Irish property bubble, would a reasonable person think that the Office of the Financial Regulator is hopelessly compromised as regulator having this approach?
Yeah, I won't do that stuff. I don't do it. I'm not saying they were wrong to do it, but I won't do it. It just conveys the wrong impression. It says we're more important getting you in than regulating you. I think that is the message.
But it's much more than the wrong impression, isn't it, Governor? It fatally compromises, does it not, the regulator being part of this whole thing that's dominated by the profit maximisation?
In fairness to them, I think if you ask them, they'll say, oh, well, no, we always said that we would regulate them properly, your property and so forth. And then they would have believed that they were actually doing that.
Now, Governor, on page 16, you say an additional element that deserves to be considered is a suggestion by some commentators that some banking personages were politically well connected. That might have been a key factor in discouraging aggressive supervisory intervention. What is your view on that?
Well, Deputy, I worked hard on the wording of that and the footnote associated with that, because it is potentially a delicate issue. I have no evidence of any corrupt transactions, and I said that in the report, and I still have no evidence of that. Now that it's a different matter to say where people well liked, people well known, and so on and so forth, but it's a leap that I'm not prepared to make from the fact that people were well liked and well known to the fact that anything wrong was decided on the basis of that.
But I'm not talking about corruption necessarily, but what do the people you spoke to in the establishment say in relation to this?
I asked them, did you not think that so-and-so was politically well connected? Would that have influenced you? And they tended to say, they all said, no, we were not influenced by that consideration. But
Governor, I mean, you're talking to leading members of the establishment now in relation to saying, of course it didn't influence us. I mean, by the simple wisdom of the late Mandy Rice Davies, they would say that, wouldn't they? They're not going to come out and say, yes, in fact,
I think that
we
somebody in the interval, either then or in the last 5 years, would have said, look here, Patrick, cop yourself on here. Don't you know that X, Y, and Z? Nobody has said that to me. So maybe we'll hear that sometime. But I haven't heard it. And I would have told you if I'd heard it.
But isn't it inevitable that the close relationship between...
it may affect attitudes and that, and the framing of the way you think about things. That's certainly the case. That's different, though.
And particularly because they all share the same ideology, as I mentioned at the beginning. But can I ask you...
I'll give you moments, the Deputy one.
Yeah. Just to sum up what I've been asking in relation to the Irish Financial Services Centre and the whole push for profit maximisation, which pushes against effective regulation. Now, in an article, the Associate Professor in the School of Business at Trinity College, William Kingston, citing yourself and citing Regling and Watson, he says the following, I quote, "From the mass of evidence they provide," that's you among others, "it emerges beyond doubt that the International Financial Services Centre, which came to life under the Haughey regime, which took office in 1987, has been an important element in this self-destruction," referring to the excesses of the property bubble. And he says tax havens, of which the IFSC is one, are in competition to offer as little regulation as possible. Do you agree with his interpretation?
Suppose I don't altogether. I think that suppose the IFSC hadn't been there, suppose it had been declared, outlawed by EU rules or something like that, I still think we would have had this problem with our domestic banks, which is what we're really talking about here. So I think the international regulatory environment, which became moved very much in the direction of laxity during the 2000s, certainly spilled over into attitudes here as well. People thought they were behaving like the general trend. There was definitely a move towards lighter regulation globally from the mid-1980s on, and that certainly influenced the environment. But whether the channel was through the IFSC, I wouldn't exactly see it like that so much. I mean, I don't dispute the fact that regulation was a relevant factor, and the fact that this sort of encouraging open-door policy was relevant for influencing regulations that affected the IFSC, but it's not as if the regulations were brought in to ease the way of IFSC banks and were seized on by local banks. I don't think that mechanism would, if that's what's implied by the discussion there.
Governor, you mentioned earlier that banking should be ethical in its conduct. In all the interviews you did with the leading players in the blowing up of the bubble, did you find any concern for the victims of the bubble as far as the young generation of working people trying to purchase a home? Let me just say the background that from 1996 to 2006, the price of a home went up by the equivalent of the average industrial wage each year. Their mortgages went from 20 years to 40 years, shackling them to this millstone of debt. Yeah. Now, if nothing else would have not have prompted them to intervene, did you find any concern for the plight of this generation who are being almost destroyed by this profiteering?
Yeah, I don't hear. So, first of all, for this report, I only interviewed a small number of the bankers. I was focusing on the regulators and that. But
the regulators precisely. They have been thinking of these unfortunate young people, not the speculators.
I think so. Not talking about the bankers that I don't really have much visibility into. I think that a lot of them are shattered. They feel that something's gone badly wrong. They're not quite sure why, and they're not sure what they could have done differently. Because of the effects of people, I don't think nobody is going breezily around saying, well, these things happen. But
Governor, I remember this period distinctly because I was in the Dáil and was virtually a lone voice in trying to challenge the massive rise of house prices, the level of profits, the speculation was going on, and this massive burden was being put on a young generation. Now, shouldn't that alone, from say 2002, 3, 4, 5 and 6, you know, they can agonise now, but shouldn't they have? They knew this at the time, but nobody said, even on that basis, that it should have been halted.
I absolutely agree. At the same time, to understand why that happened, then you've got to look at the great, huge tax revenue coming into the government, allowing it to lower tax rates and hiring more people and construction booming. So there were positive sides to that. I agree that it wasn't good and that it was going to end up, and it did end up in a very bad situation. But at the time, there were actual short-term benefits that were certainly recognised and paid more attention to than the vague idea that everything would go wrong.
But mainly to the super profits of the banks and the bondholders.
If I may niggle on the poor old bondholders, I have no great lobby for the bondholders, but they only got their money back by and large. Irish banks are so at such high standing that the bondholders, they said, well, will I invest in British government securities, or maybe how about one of those Irish banks? I'll get this amount more. So they're not in the speculator mode. But I agree with the shareholders and the other participants in the.
Higgins Centre, O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. Governor, can I just clarify, when you list some of